So today I want to introduce a very special guest, Judith Andrews. Data protection can be really complicated, so we're going to explore that a little bit today, and that's exactly what Judith does. So I've taken this shamelessly from her website, but Judith helps people to understand their responsibilities so they can make the most of personal information in their business and get on with doing what they love. Judith's business grew out of a love of helping people solve problems, especially since GDPR was introduced. She's a certified information privacy professional and a member of the International Association of Privacy Professionals. So welcome, Judith.
Thank you very much, Joe. Lovely to be here.
We're
I'm
really glad to
also
have
an
you.
accredited member of the Data and Marketing Association as well.
There you go.
Recently gone through their compliance process, so yeah.
I'm sure it was strenuous.
It was quite challenging actually. So it was great to be accepted as a member.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. Right, so to start with, we're going to do a few quick fire questions for the listener to get to know you. So I think this is one of the most important questions anyone can ever ask. What is your favourite biscuit?
Absolutely, I would agree with that, Hannah. So it depends what mood I'm in. Either a plain digestive biscuit or a jammy dodger.
Ooh, jammy dodger.
We haven't had that before.
Ah,
I had recently a jammy dodger blondie, and it was incredible. So,
wow.
I mean, that's not a biscuit, but
No,
biscuit
it
adjacent.
sounds like something that needs to be eaten in private too.
It was very good. And what is your social platform?
Definitely LinkedIn. Absolutely LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I like the process of it and the professionalism of it. Twitter scares me, although it's not called Twitter anymore, is it? And Facebook, I find the oversharing a little bit heavy at times.
Yeah.
And I'm way too old for TikTok or Instagram Reels or any of the others.
See, I think you could do some exciting stuff on TikTok, because it's not just
What with
for
data protection?
Yeah, because it is a place where people go now, and actually thinking about how we use our data, or how we need to be thinking about it within either church, charity, business, generally. Anyway, that's maybe for a conversation for another time.
Yeah, and the problem with TikTok is it is Chinese.
Mm.
So that's another sort of, do we really want to be sharing all that personal information with a Chinese-based platform? So, but yeah, you're right, that is probably another conversation for another time.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if you are a regular podcast listener, but if you are there any sort of podcasts that you go back to again and again? Any favourite ones?
So it depends what mood I'm in, because I have another business which is a cat hotel. So when I'm cleaning the cat hotel,
Hannah's like tangent right there.
Absolutely. So I listen to a lot of podcasts in the cat hotel, and it can range from things like Freakonomics.
Yeah.
Because I love economics, to diet and health, some Christian worship, all sorts of things. Depends what mood I'm in, as well as then listening to stories on the BBC or
All sorts. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh.
yeah. So a real range.
And then our last question, potentially the hardest one: gourd or pomegranate?
Pomegranate.
Pomegranate all the way.
Yeah. Reminds me
That's
of Christmas
winning.
though.
Ah, yeah, I can see that.
I think that's the one that everyone's picked so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand. Gourd is a bit, a bit special, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
Maybe it tells you more about the people that answer that question, what they are, who they about, a bit about their character.
Yeah.
Yeah. We haven't quite worked out what that means though.
No.
We'll get there.
Yeah. So thank you for answering those.
That's okay.
I always say quick fire, but they end up not being, because we just end up sort of
That's it.
expanding on each of them. But tell us a bit about yourself and your journey. Kind of how did you get to where you are today? Entering into the exciting and
Glamorous world of data
adventurous
And glamorous
world
came to my mind as well.
of data protection.
Okay, so I spent most of my working life in banking and insurance, and then was made redundant in 2016 and set up as a virtual assistant. And it was working with one of my clients as a virtual assistant that I was asked to explore GDPR because it was coming into effect in sort of the May. This was the end of 2017. And I hate to say it, I fell in love with it. And after helping them sort of make sense of it, that's what I then changed my business to do. And I was really busy, of course, for that whole year, for 2018, when GDPR came into effect. And then realised I needed to do something with it. So I became a member of the International Association of Privacy Professionals. I did a qualification and then changed my business in 2019 to just doing data protection for SMEs and healthcare organisations. So, and that's all I do now. All I do.
And when you say SMEs, like, is that any particular industry or just kind of anyone?
No,
of
and
that
that's
size?
the best bit. I like the variety. So I can work with printing companies or estate agents, insurance brokers, all sorts, all sorts. And that's the bit I like, because the legislation, although it does change, doesn't really change. But the SMEs that I work with all need the data protection stuff put in place. But I get enjoyment out of listening to their stories.
Yeah.
And figuring out what it
businesses.
looks like when the rubber hits the road. Yeah,
absolutely. And all businesses need to use data, personal information, to thrive. There's not one business that can survive without using personal information. So it's helping them maximise the information that they're collecting, whether it's from their customers or business contacts, but making them use it correctly and ethically, because nobody likes spam, to grow their businesses.
Yeah. I mean, we met probably a couple of years back now, wasn't it, through networking?
Yeah, we did, yeah.
And it's always interesting to then find that not only can businesses work together, but you have that crossover in terms of faith as well. So
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your faith journey and how that sort of links into running your business, I guess?
Yeah, sure. So in my spare time, I'm a licensed lay minister in the Church of England. I'm an Anna chaplain, which is for ministry to older people and people living with dementia and their families and carers. And I've also got some other sort of technical responsibilities within the Church of England hierarchical structure as well at the moment. I went back to church when I had my children, actually, and when we got married and then we had our children. I started going back to church then, so in my sort of mid-20s, and it became a really important part to my life. Going through the sort of, I did Alpha twice. I retook my baptism vows, and then I was in a house group, and our house group leader said, "Do you fancy being on the prayer rota?" And that, I blame him. He was 90 last week. Oh. Michael, I love him. He's a big influence on my life even now. So I blame him that I'm now a lay minister and a chaplain, because suddenly I felt God needed me to do more. So it fits quite well alongside my business, because I can have the flexibility to take time out to do ministry work during the week. But yeah, it's always, and I'd much prefer to. That's where my passion is, actually, working with, especially with older people. There's nothing better than going and getting alongside someone who has forgotten their faith, maybe, and just sort of reawakening it. That gives me a lot of joy.
Yeah. So, moving on from yourself and how you got to this point, tell us a little bit about privacy. I'm going to go with privacy. Maybe that should be a quick fire question on that. How do we say it? But tell us about that and GDPR. And then thinking a little bit further, what do churches need to be aware of with privacy? Because I think many churches are aware of it, but it often becomes just a tick box exercise. So what do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah. So the data protection framework, there's a lot of laws and regulations. The ones that affect small businesses and churches are the UK GDPR, the Data Protection Act 2018, and then the Privacy and Electronic Communication Regulations. And they cover everything from collecting personal information to using it within marketing. Personal information, as defined in the legislation, is anything that can identify a living person. So that can be, but it needs to be in combination. So just saying Judith in Margate, there's probably not many Judiths in Margate, but I have met a couple of others. But saying Judith Andrews in Margate, then it becomes identifiable. So it's...
And I imagine that can be a bit of a blurred line depending on what the data is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in a church context, there's an awful lot of personal information and also sensitive personal information that's moving around between people. If you think about maybe a prayer list, an email lists, it's, you know, and there is a fine line, I think, especially in a church environment, that you want to support members of your church family, but when sometimes that can fall into gossip. And then when you're dealing with personal information or sensitive personal information, it can become a bit of a sort of a tricky area, especially for churches, because we think of ourselves as a family and supporting each other, but actually we do have a responsibility to individuals' privacy.
And is there, I mean, you mentioned the sensitivity. Part of that, I guess, is that businesses maybe deal more in a space where it's generally going to be adults that they're dealing with, unless they're, you know, a specific type of business. But churches have people of all ages. So is there a crossover with safeguarding when it comes to that sensitive data as well?
Safeguarding always trumps data, everything. Safeguarding trumps data protection, absolutely. So if there is ever a safeguarding issue and someone says don't say anything because of GDPR, that is wrong.
Yeah.
There is no argument on that one. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And in the UK, children have a right to privacy from about 12 in their own right. So you've got to then think about parental responsibility and children's rights to their personal information. My view with churches, or all businesses actually, is they need to be very mindful of the information that they're collecting and why they're collecting it. Now, I know in a church environment, we've always done it like this, because that's quite often what I'm told. You know, Mary, who does some pastoral work, has got a list as long as your arm of people that she goes and visits with notes in, you know, and that's the way it's always been done. Trying to change people's attitude, you need to be quite delicate on how you do that. But there are some good things. You know, if you're doing one-off baptism to a family that don't come to church, then why not ask them if you can communicate with them? Why not ask them if you can add them to an email database? Why not have an email database? You invite them to things. You know, if it's a child that you're baptising, then maybe you're doing some children's activities that you might like to invite them to that might be of interest. There's lots of things. The same with the other end of the spectrum, older people's work. You know, especially the stuff that I do. You don't necessarily get the regular churchgoers. Well, why not invite them or their families? Connect with people and use the data to benefit your organisation. Yeah,
because I guess it's not about saying you have to stop doing this.
Absolutely.
But it may be about saying, in order to keep doing this, you need to do it in this way, or you need to think about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, data protection is about personal information. So it's about people. But in a church, you need to be, especially if churches are mostly run by volunteers, you need to think about the business information that might be within a church. You know, the treasurer, for example, what are they dealing with and how are they dealing with it? So is it all on their computer? And then if something happens, how do you get access to it? So it is thinking about the information that is flowing around the church, and because there is not normally one PC that is holding everything. It's held in numerous places, people's homes, people's laptops. So it's people's address books.
So there is a lot to think about.
Yes.
For churches, sort of, I don't even say getting started, but sort of continuing on. What are the essentials that churches need to be thinking about when considering these areas, and how do they even get started in doing it correctly? legally.
Right, okay. So I think the first thing to say is GDPR doesn't stop you doing anything. I'm quite often hear from all sorts of people, even vicars and pastors, who say GDPR won't let us do that. That's not true. But what you do need to make sure is that the information that is being collected and held, is secure, and it's not accessible by people who don't need to have access to it. So it's making sure that it's maybe in one place, that you know where it is. So the data mapping exercise would be good to carry out. Where is information being stored and how it's being stored? Is it hard copy? Is it just soft copy, electronic files? Who's got access to it? Who has got it? If someone on a pastoral team is the only person holding addresses and contacts of people that they're visiting, is that really sensible?
Yeah.
So that's what I would start with, is a data mapping exercise, finding out where the data is and who's got access to it.
Yeah, and I guess in order to do that, you need to figure out what is personal data as well.
Yes, yeah. But I think for churches, it's going to be you're going to have different pockets of information, aren't you, across the church and across the volunteers. So whether it's young people's information's being held by a youth leader, or older people, or baptism records or wedding records, but actually whoever leads the church has a legal responsibility for that information. So they need to know where it is and who has it.
I mean, you say whoever leads the church, so is that by default the person who has that responsibility, that if the church hasn't, I suppose, appointed someone whose role is a data officer in the same way as you have like a safeguarding lead, is that then by default the church leader, pastor, minister who has that?
So within the Church of England, the vicar in each parish has legal responsibility for the parish, so therefore has legal responsibility to that data. It would depend on the setup of
so it could be trustees or something.
Trustees, but it would be that sort of governing body would have then legal responsibility to the data. They should, in an ideal world, appoint someone to be almost a de facto data protection officer, someone who is a single point of contact, who would know where that data is and have responsibility for it. But it's not a perfect world, is it?
Yeah. And I guess that leads on to the next question then, that what do you see churches getting wrong with privacy? Are there any common themes you see, or any things that just bugbears that annoy you when you see it?
Something that irritates me more than slightly irritates me is on a prayer list having someone's name and surname. That's someone wants to be prayed for. Well, you don't need to have their name and surname.
You mean like a public prayer list that's accessible,
either
to
shared
anyone?
around or spoken? You don't need to do that. That could be quite a sensitive subject. Just saying their first name is enough. God knows who they are. Not everyone else needs to.
Yeah, I suppose with that in mind as well, that, I mean, I don't see it publicly in terms of written very often with prayer lists, but you may see it in an email, and I think you can assume that an email isn't public because you're just sending it to a limited list. Maybe you have like a general newsletter list and then a separate prayer list, but it's also then very easy to forward that email on, and it becomes public.
Well, email is awful, isn't it? I mean, you quite often receive emails that have been forwarded that you shouldn't have seen, and you always read something that you don't really want to read. Yeah. But I think that's just common sense about email. Should you be sending this email? Because technically that would be a data breach, which nobody wants.
No.
Anything else that annoys you, or that are kind of actually, I'll just say red flags, but quite concerning for that churches are doing wrong?
I suppose with my business head on, what frustrates me is that we're quite slow in using that information, following up on whether it's a baptism request or a wedding that's been carried out, to sort of tell people who don't regularly come into church what great things we do or what else there might be doing. So sort of to keep communicating with people. For my own church, we are definitely not in the 20th century, let alone the 21st century, when it comes to communicating better with people. And I think that's how we miss out. And it's all very well saying, well, the people who come here don't use email. Well, that's great. They come here and they might hear the notice sheet or pick up a Pew News. But actually the people we want to communicate with will use email and don't come here on Sundays.
Yeah. And I think that's something where it's looking at data in a positive light rather than a tick box or a sort of fear-based exercise that we have to do.
Yeah, you know, the funerals that we do, you know, these people, you know, maybe some sort of remembrance service would be appropriate to invite them to. And, you know, especially after COVID, there were so many people weren't able to go to funerals because the numbers were restricted. You know, you've still got that grief process to go through.
Yeah.
So there's lots of needs that you can use the data for in a positive way. Again, that comes down to making sure that the communication is worded well.
Yeah.
So bringing in your services as a business that helps with these things, when a church does approach you, what kind of thing are they generally asking you to do, and where do you start?
So the first thing I do is an information audit and data mapping exercise to work out what data is coming into the business or the church, and to see why it's being used and who's got access to it, how it's being stored, and then working through the process of making sure that the data is being used correctly, that it's being deleted at the right time, that it's being archived if it needs to be archived. Some information does need to be kept, obviously, for a long time. So that, and also giving the church or the business the confidence to use the data, so that they understand their responsibilities, and trying to do that in a really pragmatic way. It's all very well saying, you know, this is the legislation, but we don't want to stop people using data because it's important. It is the lifeblood of what businesses and churches are doing now and how they communicate. You know, that's the world we live in the 21st century.
So, trying to sort of round things off to have this very big, potentially complicated and confusing area.
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities for UK churches right now when thinking about data? Maybe the challenges first.
Challenges is the amount of historical data that is within churches, the amount of files and paper and old computers. Or defunct computers that are...
But we can't throw them away because someone donated money to buy them. Absolutely.
Or they've been given by somebody's brother's friend who knows upgrading their own, you know, and those things. And actually, is it worth investing in something like Office 365? And if you're a registered charity, they do a reduced rate. So is it worth investing in that to make sure that you've got data hygiene? That you know where everything is. So that would be the challenge, is just bringing it all together and making sure that, you know, there aren't little pockets of data elsewhere around your church family. Because what happens when people die or move on? What happens to that information then?
Yeah. And opportunities?
Opportunities, as I think, is communicating. We need to learn to communicate better. It's all very well a church being there, but actually getting people to understand what we do and what we believe, and that we're not all scary, and get people to come to us is using communication. So whether that's on social media or with direct email marketing or even post, then you know, that comes under the data protection legislation as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can use data better.
And that's exciting. That's what we're all about.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so I feel like actually this was a much more encouraging conversation than sort of we were expecting.
Brilliant. Good. Yeah. Well, that's what I like to do. I do like data protection, and I think it's an opportunity.
Yeah, definitely.
It's carrot, not all stick.
Yeah, and as you say, kind of like privacy, GDPR to someone, and especially churches, I think you just have this panic of going, we're going to be fined £1 billion for something that we didn't know that we did, and we don't have that money, obviously, and so people kind of panic, and then, like you say, they end up going, we can't do that because of GDPR.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because actually they don't really understand it.
Yeah. And it's not, yes, GDPR is important. Protecting people's information is important, really important. But actually, we as churches, we do share an awful lot of information with our fellow churchgoers that we probably wouldn't share in any other respect. So yes, it has to be protected, but we are freely giving that. So why not then use it?
Yeah.
Use it in a way that benefits our church and grows our church, because that's what the church is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been great to have you here today, Judith, sharing your wisdom with us and our listeners. I've taken a few notes. I've definitely learned some things. Where's the best place for people to find out more about you and get in touch if they want to?
You can email me at judith@businesstamer.co.uk. You can find me on my website, which is businesstamer.co.uk, or you can find me on LinkedIn as Judith Andrews.
Super.
Or you can find me at St Lawrence Church in Ramsgate.
Amazing.
There you go. So there's all of your personal data just given away in one.
I'm completely identifiable.
That's it. Judith, thank you so much for joining us today. We've really enjoyed that.
It's been a pleasure.
And I'm sure it's been helpful for our listeners as well. And our next episode coming next week is going to be all about live streaming. So if you want to find out a little bit more about that and what's been going on with live streaming since the big COVID, then come back and join us next week.